Rhineland Plateau, Germany, April 17, 1945. Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood in the cobblestone square of Himmelbach at 0847 hours, watching smoke rise from what used to be the village church. The structure had collapsed inward 3 days earlier during American artillery preparation, and now its bell tower leaned at an angle that defied physics, held upright only by twisted iron reinforcement and stubborn masonry. Webb commanded 3rd Platoon, Baker Company, 79th Infantry Division, and his orders were simple: secure the square, establish a command post, wait for the supply convoy that would arrive before noon. The village had fallen without resistance. German forces had withdrawn west during the night of April 14, leaving behind empty positions and a civilian population that watched American soldiers with expressions Webb couldn't categorize as either relief or resentment. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. War had taught him that human emotion rarely fit into clean categories. Webb was 26 years old, a former history teacher from Pennsylvania who had enlisted in 1942 after Pearl Harbor. He had landed at Normandy on June 8, fought through the Bocage country, survived the Hurtgen forest, and crossed the Rhine on March 24. By April of 1945, he had seen enough combat to understand that victory was inevitable and that inevitability didn't make the dying any easier. The square measured roughly 60 meters across, surrounded by damaged buildings that had once housed a bakery, a butcher shop, a small pharmacy, and what appeared to be a meeting hall. Most of the structures showed shell damage. Windows were empty frames. Doors hung from single hinges. The cobblestones were cracked and displaced by near misses that had cratered the subsurface. Webb's platoon consisted of 32 men, divided into 3 squads. First squad was establishing observation posts at the eastern edge of the village. Second squad was clearing buildings on the north side. Third squad was with Webb in the square, setting up the company aid station in the least damaged structure, the former meeting hall. At 0852 hours, Corporal Daniel Reeves approached Webb and reported a situation that required the lieutenant's attention. Reeves was a farm kid from Iowa, 23 years old, who had been with the platoon since before Normandy. He spoke in the clipped, economical manner soldiers develop when words need to convey maximum information with minimum time. "Sir, we've got civilians gathered on the west side. Maybe 40 of them. They've got someone tied to a post. Looks like they're about to execute her." Webb felt something tighten in his chest. He had encountered this before, twice in France and once in Belgium. Liberation brought not just freedom but also retribution. Communities that had lived under occupation for years suddenly found themselves with the power to punish those they deemed collaborators. The punishment was often immediate and brutal. "Show me," Webb said. Reeves led him west through a narrow street flanked by damaged row houses. The buildings here had sustained less damage than those around the square. The street opened into a smaller plaza, perhaps 30 meters across, dominated by a stone fountain that no longer functioned. The fountain's basin was filled with debris and rainwater that had turned green with algae. The crowd was larger than 40. Webb counted at least 60 civilians, mostly older men and women, with a scattering of younger people and a few children. They formed a loose semicircle around a wooden post that had been driven into the ground near the fountain. Tied to the post was a woman. She appeared to be in her early 30s, though it was difficult to determine age with certainty. Her hair was dark, cut short. Her clothing was torn and stained. Her face showed bruising around the left eye and along the jawline. Her wrists were bound behind the post with rope that had been tied tight enough to cut into the skin. Above her head, someone had nailed a crude wooden sign painted with a single word in German, Verräterin. Traitor. The crowd was not silent. People were shouting, though Webb's limited German prevented him from understanding most of what was being said. The tone was clear enough. Anger, accusation, demands for justice or revenge. The distinction between those two concepts had become blurred in communities that had suffered years of occupation and war. Webb assessed the tactical situation with the automatic calculation that combat experience had burned into his thinking. The crowd was armed, not with firearms, but with improvised weapons. He saw clubs, a hammer, what appeared to be a sharpened farming implement. The crowd's attention was focused entirely on the woman. No one had noticed the American soldiers yet. Reeves stood beside Webb, waiting for orders. Behind them, 3 more soldiers from 3rd Squad had followed. Private First Class Thomas Chen, Private Robert Sullivan, and Private James Martinez. All 3 carried M1 Garand rifles at low ready, safeties engaged, fingers outside trigger guards. They were trained, disciplined, and waiting to see what their lieutenant would decide. Webb had perhaps 30 seconds to make a decision before the situation progressed beyond intervention. He could see movement in the crowd, people pushing forward, the energy building toward violence. Someone in the back was holding what looked like a length of rope fashioned into a noose. The Geneva Convention was clear about the treatment of civilians in occupied territory. Article 27 prohibited violence against protected persons. Article 33 prohibited collective punishment and reprisals. But the practical application of these rules in a village square in April 1945 was complicated by factors that legal documents didn't address. This was a German village executing what they claimed was a German traitor. The United States Army was an occupying force, not a governing authority. The military government teams that would establish civil administration hadn't arrived yet. Webb's authority extended only to immediate military necessity. He could walk away. Report the incident to battalion. Let someone else decide how to handle it. That would be the safe choice, the one that wouldn't generate questions or complications. But walking away meant the woman would die, probably within the next 5 minutes, and Webb would carry the memory of that choice for however long he lived after the war ended. He stepped forward into the plaza. The crowd noticed him immediately. The shouting diminished, replaced by a wary silence as 60 German civilians turned to face 5 American soldiers. Webb walked steadily toward the post where the woman was tied, his rifle slung across his back, hands visible and empty. He stopped 10 feet from the nearest civilians and spoke in English, knowing someone in the crowd would understand. This woman is now under the protection of the United States Army. Release her immediately. The silence held for perhaps 3 seconds. Then an older man stepped forward from the crowd. He was thin, perhaps 60 years old, wearing a worn suit jacket over a collarless shirt. His face was deeply lined, weathered by years of outdoor work. When he spoke, his English was heavily accented but comprehensible. This is not your concern, American. This woman betrayed our village. She gave information to your soldiers. She helped your bombers target our homes. She is a traitor to Germany, and we will punish her as traitors deserve. Webb kept his voice level, calm, the tone he used when de-escalating situations that could turn violent. I understand your anger. But you don't have the authority to execute anyone. If this woman committed crimes, she'll face proper legal proceedings under military government jurisdiction. But not like this. A younger man pushed forward from the crowd, mid-20s, with the hardened look of someone who had recently returned from military service. He wore civilian clothes, but his bearing was military. His right hand was missing, the sleeve of his jacket pinned at the wrist. Proper proceedings? His voice was sharp with contempt. Your proper proceedings destroyed our country. Your bombers killed my wife and daughter. This woman, he gestured toward the post with his remaining hand, this woman guided your aircraft. She gave them coordinates. She marked targets with signals. She helped murder German civilians, and you want to give her a trial? Webb recognized the emotional logic. The need to assign blame for suffering, to find someone accountable for loss that otherwise had no meaning. He had felt the same impulse himself, standing over the bodies of soldiers he had commanded, looking for someone or something to hold responsible beyond the abstract machinery of war. What's her name? Webb asked. The question seemed to catch the one-armed man off guard. What? The woman's name. If you're executing her for specific crimes, you must know her name. The older man in the suit jacket answered. Anna Kessler. She was a teacher before the war. Then she became a spy for the Americans. Webb turned his attention to the woman tied to the post. She had not spoken since he arrived. Her head was lowered, eyes focused on the ground. Her breathing was rapid, shallow, the physical manifestation of fear held under tight control. Miss Kessler, Webb said in English, then repeated it in his limited German. Fräulein Kessler. She raised her head slowly. Her eyes met his. They were dark brown, red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep or both. There was fear in those eyes, but also something else. A kind of exhausted resignation, the look of someone who had already accepted what was coming and was simply waiting for it to end. Do you speak English? Webb asked. She nodded slightly. Some. Yes. Did you help American forces? The crowd surged forward at the question, voices rising in anger. Webb raised one hand without turning around, and Reeves and the other soldiers shifted position, creating a barrier between Webb and the crowd. It was a subtle movement, not threatening, just a repositioning that made clear the Americans would intervene if necessary. Anna Kessler spoke softly, barely audible above the crowd noise. I gave water to wounded soldiers. American soldiers. They were dying in a ditch near the school where I taught. I gave them water and bandages. That is my crime. The older man in the suit jacket shouted over her words. She gave them maps. She told them where our soldiers were positioned. She helped them kill German boys. Anna Kessler's voice remained quiet but firm. I gave them water. Nothing more. I am a teacher, not a spy. I do not have maps. I do not know military positions. I gave water to dying men because they were human beings and I am still human despite everything this war has done to us. Webb believed her. Not because he was naive about what happened in occupied villages, but because her story matched a pattern he had encountered before. Acts of basic humanity reframed as betrayal. Mercy redefined as treason. The war had created a moral inversion where kindness became evidence of guilt. But his belief didn't matter in this plaza. What mattered was the crowd's belief, and they had already decided Anna Kessler was guilty. They had tied her to a post and prepared to execute her. They were not looking for truth. They were looking for catharsis. Webb turned back to face the crowd. Under the authority of the United States Army and the laws of occupation, I am placing this woman in protective custody. She will be transferred to military government authorities for investigation. If she committed crimes, she will face appropriate legal process. But there will be no execution here today. The one-armed man stepped closer, his face flushed with anger. You have no authority over German justice. This is our village. Our laws. Our decision. Your laws ended when your government surrendered, Webb said. This village is now under military occupation. That means American authority supersedes German civil authority. Those are the rules of warfare, and they apply whether you like them or not. He could feel the situation balanced on a knife edge. The crowd wanted blood. They wanted someone to pay for years of suffering. Anna Kessler was available, vulnerable, and already condemned in their minds. All it would take was one person to throw the first stone, and the crowd would transform from individuals into a mob. Webb made a calculation. He drew his M1911 pistol from his holster, kept it pointed at the ground, and walked directly to the post where Anna Kessler was tied. The crowd parted slightly, wary of the weapon, uncertain whether the American officer would actually use it. Webb holstered the pistol and drew his combat knife. The blade was 7 inches long, designed for close combat and utility work. He positioned himself behind the post and began cutting the rope that bound Anna Kessler's wrists. The rope was thick hemp, tied in multiple loops. It had been secured tight enough that Anna Kessler's hands had swollen and turned dark from restricted blood flow. Webb worked the knife carefully, sawing through the fibers while trying not to cut her skin. Behind him, the crowd began to advance. Reeves and the other soldiers moved to intercept, forming a line between Webb and the civilians. Reeves spoke loudly in English, knowing tone would communicate even if words didn't. That's far enough. Stay back. The rope parted. Anna Kessler's arms dropped to her sides. She gasped, stumbled, would have fallen if Webb hadn't caught her shoulder and steadied her. Her wrists were raw, bleeding where the rope had cut deepest. She was trembling, either from fear or relief or the physical shock of restored circulation. Webb supported her weight and turned to face the crowd. This woman is under American protection. Anyone who harms her will be considered to have attacked United States military personnel. I will respond accordingly. The threat was clear and specific. The crowd understood. They were angry, but they were not suicidal. They had lived through years of war and learned when to push and when to retreat. The older man in the suit jacket spoke again, his voice heavy with bitterness. You protect traitors while German boys died defending this village. You call this justice? I call it law, Webb said. Law is what separates us from animals. When we abandon law, we abandon our humanity. I've seen what happens when people forget that. I've walked through villages where justice meant massacre. I won't let this village become another one of those places. He gestured to Reeves. Corporal, escort Miss Kessler to the aid station. Get a medic to treat her wrists. Post a guard. No one approaches her without my authorization. Reeves moved forward and took Anna Kessler's arm gently, supporting her as they began walking back toward the main square. Sullivan and Martinez maintained their position, weapons ready but not raised, watching the crowd for any sign of aggressive movement. Webb remained in the plaza, facing 60 Germans who watched him with expressions ranging from hatred to resignation. He kept his voice firm but not hostile. The war is ending. Probably within weeks. When it ends, you'll need to rebuild this village. You'll need to live with each other. Executing this woman won't bring back the people you lost. It will just add another body to the count and another burden to carry for the rest of your lives. He paused, let the words settle. Go home. Take care of your families. Let military government handle questions of justice. That's the only way forward from here. Webb turned and walked away from the crowd, keeping his pace steady, neither hurrying nor showing hesitation. Chen and Martinez fell in beside him, weapons still ready. No one from the crowd followed. No one threw stones or shouted threats. They simply dispersed slowly, returning to damaged homes and uncertain futures. By 0940 hours, Anna Kessler was in the aid station receiving treatment from Doc Wilson, the platoon medic. Wilson was a conscientious objector from Ohio who had volunteered for medical service rather than carry a rifle. He worked on Anna Kessler's wrists with careful precision, cleaning the rope burns and applying sulfanilamide powder to prevent infection. Webb stood outside the aid station, writing a situation report that would go to Captain Morrison at company headquarters. The report documented the incident in neutral language. Civilian unrest addressed through assertion of military authority, one German civilian taken into protective custody pending investigation, no casualties, situation resolved without use of force. Reeves approached and stood beside Webb, watching the street. After a moment, he spoke quietly. Sir, do you think battalion will back your decision? It was a fair question. Webb had exceeded his authority in ways that could generate complications. Military government teams were supposed to handle civilian affairs. Combat officers were supposed to focus on military objectives. By intervening in what the Germans claimed was internal justice, Webb had inserted himself and his platoon into a situation that had no clear resolution. I don't know, Webb said honestly. But I couldn't walk away. Why not, sir? We've walked away from a lot of things in this war. Webb considered the question. He thought about the villages in France where similar situations had occurred, where women accused of sleeping with German soldiers had been paraded through streets with shaved heads and painted faces. He thought about the Belgian town where they had found a man hanged from a bridge, accused of collaborating with the Gestapo. He thought about all the times he had looked away because intervention seemed impossible or pointless or beyond his authority. Because this time I was here, Webb said. And she was about to die. And I had the power to stop it. That makes it my responsibility. Doc Wilson emerged from the aid station. Sir, Miss Kessler's wounds are treated. She's stable. But she's severely dehydrated and malnourished. I'd guess she hasn't eaten properly in several days. Maybe longer. Can she travel? Not far. Not without assistance. Webb checked his watch. The supply convoy was due in 90 minutes. It would include vehicles that could transport Anna Kessler to battalion headquarters, where military government personnel could take custody. Until then, she would remain under 3rd Platoon's protection. At 1130 hours, the supply convoy arrived. 6 trucks carrying ammunition, rations, fuel, and mail. The convoy commander was a first lieutenant from Battalion Logistics who looked at Webb's request to transport a German civilian with obvious skepticism. "You want me to take a Jerry back to battalion?" "What for?" "Protective custody. There was an incident in the village. She needs to be transferred to military government for investigation." The logistics lieutenant shrugged. "Your problem, your paperwork. Put her in truck 4. She rides in back with the ammo crates." Anna Kessler was helped into the truck by Doc Wilson and Private Chen. She moved slowly, stiffly, her wrists wrapped in white gauze. Before the truck departed, she looked back at Webb and spoke in English that was clearer than it had been in the plaza. "Thank you, Lieutenant. For my life." Webb nodded but didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound either self-serving or inadequate. He had cut a rope because leaving it uncut meant becoming complicit in murder. The choice had been simple even if the consequences were not. The convoy departed at 1147 hours. Webb watched the trucks disappear east along the damaged road, carrying supplies forward and one German woman back toward whatever uncertain future awaited her in a military government detention facility. Captain Morrison arrived in Himmelbach at 1430 hours, riding in a jeep with the company first sergeant. Morrison was 32 years old, a career officer who had commanded Baker Company since before Normandy. He was professional, competent, and by the book in ways that Webb usually respected but now worried might become a problem. Morrison read Webb's situation report, then listened to Webb's verbal account of the incident. When Webb finished, Morrison folded the report and put it in his map case without comment. He stood in the square, looking at the damaged buildings, then turned to Webb. "Walk with me, Lieutenant." They walked to the edge of the village, where the road descended through terraced farmland that had not been cultivated this spring. The fields were overgrown with weeds. Farm equipment sat abandoned, slowly rusting. In the distance, artillery rumbled, a constant background noise that had become so normal that soldiers barely noticed it anymore. Morrison spoke without looking at Webb. "You put yourself and your platoon in a difficult position. That crowd could have attacked you. You could have been forced to shoot German civilians. That would have created a situation that battalion would spend weeks cleaning up." "Yes, sir. I understand that. Do you also understand that by taking that woman into custody, you've made 3rd Platoon responsible for her safety? If someone from that village decides to finish what you interrupted, it becomes our problem. We're infantry, Lieutenant. We're not police. We're not military government. We're supposed to be focused on combat operations, not refereeing German civil disputes." Webb had expected this conversation. He had prepared arguments, justifications, references to Geneva Convention articles and rules of land warfare. But standing in the overgrown farmland with his company commander, those arguments seemed inadequate to explain the actual decision he had made in that plaza. "Sir, she was about to be executed for giving water to wounded soldiers. If I had walked away, she would be dead, and I would know I let it happen. I couldn't carry that. Not after everything else I've carried in this war." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly, almost to himself. We've all had to make choices we didn't want to make. We've all had to walk away from things we wished we could fix. That's war, Lieutenant. It's bigger than individual conscience. I know, sir. But individual conscience is all I have left. If I lose that, I'm not sure what I'm fighting for anymore. Morrison turned to look at Webb directly. His expression was difficult to read, somewhere between sympathy and exasperation. Battalion is sending the woman to a DP camp near Wiesbaden. Military government will investigate her case. If she's cleared, she'll be released. If she's charged, she'll face tribunal. Either way, she's out of your hands now. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. I'm not endorsing what you did. I'm just dealing with the consequences. You made a choice that could have gone very wrong. It didn't, this time. But don't mistake survival for vindication. Morrison walked back toward his jeep, then paused and turned back. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I probably would have done the same thing. I'm just not sure if that makes it right or just makes us both fools. The supply convoy that had taken Anna Kessler east returned to Himmelbach on April 19. The logistics lieutenant handed Webb a receipt confirming transfer of one German civilian female to military government custody at battalion headquarters. The receipt was stamped and signed by a major whose name Webb didn't recognize. 3rd Platoon remained in Himmelbach for 6 more days, conducting security patrols and preparing for the division's final push east. The village remained tense. Webb occasionally saw the one-armed man or the older man in the suit jacket watching from doorways or damaged windows. They never approached. They never spoke. They just watched with expressions that communicated a resentment that would probably never fully resolve. On April 25, Baker Company moved out, heading east toward Bavaria. The war ended 13 days later on May 8, 1945. Webb was in a farmhouse near Munich when the ceasefire was announced. Men cheered, fired rifles into the air, got drunk on liberated German beer. Webb sat alone in a corner and felt nothing except exhaustion. He never learned what happened to Anna Kessler. After the war, he considered trying to find out, perhaps through military government records or displaced persons registries. But he decided against it. Her story was complete from his perspective. He had cut the rope. She had lived. What came after was hers to carry, not his. Webb returned to Pennsylvania in December 1945. He resumed teaching history at the same high school where he had worked before the war. He never spoke publicly about what had happened in Himmelbach. When students asked about his combat experience, he gave vague answers about serving in Europe and focused his classes on broader historical patterns rather than personal anecdotes. In 1962, Webb received a letter forwarded through the Veterans Administration. It was written in English, postmarked from Toronto, Canada. The handwriting was careful, precise. Dear Lieutenant Webb, I do not know if you will remember me. We met in April 1945 in a German village. You cut a rope that bound me to a post. You saved my life. I have lived in Canada since 1947. I teach English at a school here. I married. I have 2 children. I have built a life that would not exist without your intervention. I wanted you to know that your decision to help me was not wasted. I have tried to live in a way that honors the mercy you showed. I teach my students to value human dignity even when the world encourages them to look away. I do not know if what I write makes sense to you. I only know that I have thought often of that morning in the plaza, and I have wondered what became of the American officer who chose compassion when hatred would have been easier. Thank you for my life, and for the lives of my children, and for whatever good I have been able to do because you gave me the chance to continue. Anna Kessler. Webb read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer with his military discharge papers and combat medals. He never replied. Some conversations were complete without additional words. Marcus Webb died in 1989 at the age of 70. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II, his career as a high school history teacher, and his family. It did not mention Anna Kessler or the rope he cut in a village plaza in April 1945. But the decision he made that morning demonstrated a principle that transcends individual lives and specific circumstances. In war, when institutional authority breaks down and violence becomes self-perpetuating, individual moral choice becomes the last defense against complete degradation. Webb faced a situation where doing nothing was permissible, where intervention risked his men and complicated his mission, where the simplest choice was to walk away. He chose differently because he understood that some actions define who you are more than any official duty or tactical objective. The rope he cut was hemp and fiber, but what he severed was the logic that transforms human beings into acceptable casualties in the name of collective justice. That logic operated in Himmelbach in April 1945, and it operates wherever communities fracture and rage overwhelms restraint. Webb's decision to intervene was not strategic. It was not tactically optimal. It was simply human, the insistence that mercy matters even when mercy is inconvenient. Anna Kessler lived because Marcus Webb refused to participate in her death through inaction. She taught children, raised a family, contributed to a community that never knew how close she came to dying in a German village plaza. Her life and her children's lives and the students she taught became the consequence of one lieutenant's refusal to accept that some deaths are inevitable. The war ended in May 1945, but the moral questions it raised continue. When do we intervene? When do we walk away? How do we balance duty to mission against duty to humanity? These questions have no universal answers. They can only be answered in specific moments by individuals who must live with the consequences of their choices. Webb chose to cut the rope. That choice defined him more completely than any battle he fought or any medal he earned. It was the moment when he decided what kind of man he would be when authority was absent and conscience was the only guide. If this story moved you or made you think differently about individual responsibility in impossible situations, we'd appreciate you sharing it. These stories matter because they remind us that history is built from individual decisions, and those decisions continue to echo long after the events themselves have passed into memory. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next story.